I'm going to talk about the concept and the reality, very much the reality in this world that we live in, or that seems to be so real and concrete, the concept of the victimiser. And I don't think you can have any relationship with meaning when it comes to this concept of the victimizer. For whenever there's a victimizer, there's going to be a victim. But you can't have any sense of real relationship with meaning around these concepts without having some connection with first and foremost a sense of compassion. And the critical thing when we consider victimizers, and you might call it the Hitler problem, because there's a little bit of Hitler in all of us, in the sense that when a toddler is screaming because he doesn't get his way, it's like this dictatorial monster that has an appetite that must be met, and to hell with anyone that gets in the way. And that appetite could be very destructive. You could be taking scissors, sharp scissors, out of the hands of a toddler, and they could be screaming to get this plaything back. And in a sense, that is what humanity is when it's sleeping, when it's totally trapped in the ego thought system. But the most critical thing to relate to the word victimizer is right mind. Because everyone with ears, everyone in a body, everyone handling the challenges of a body, the ups and downs of a body, the psychology that goes with the identification with the body, every single one is going to have experiences at different times in their life of upset and frustration and a sense of being victimized. And it could be just a sense of victimization that's very general, like, why was I born to this family? Or why is my boss so cruel to me? Or why aren't I prettier? Or why don't I have more money? Because that's still, the thought itself is a projection of this victim identity. And perhaps we see it most acutely in people that have experienced trauma. And Freud's great breakthrough was that he said he opened a door that was definitely opened outside of science in yoga, and I think it was something that was, the Greeks had a good sense of. In fact, you can see it in their tragedies, the evolution of their tragedies. You had the chorus, and you had Apollo, the god of appreciation, and you had Ares, the god of war. And basically it was a discussion, a debate between the part of your mind that's intent on seeing how to appreciate no matter what, whatever is going on in your life. And that doesn't mean appreciating pain, but appreciating the things that make sense to appreciate. And then Ares on the other side, that was the call to aggression, the cause to attacks, thoughts, and defense. And the chorus was there to sort of be the neutral appreciator. And you could say that in a way that it was going with the strongest argument, and that's what you might call the decision maker in our minds. But this energetic of the victimizer, or someone that's had trauma, back to Freud for a second there, his great breakthrough was that where there's trauma, just like an appendix, if you have an appendix that gets infected or needs to be extracted, there's a doctor comes along and his job is to cut it out. Well, similarly, if you have some trauma, it doesn't just go away because you want it to, right? It shapes your being and your quality of expression and the patterns of your thoughts and the programming that you're running under. And he made clear that, if that trauma, just like the appendix that's removed, isn't attended to, you're going to have a neurotic response. Neurosis is going to come along. And I would say that for the vast majority of humanity, the importance of this very simple idea that where there's trauma, then neurosis follows, and with it comes this victimizer paradigm, dichotomy. On the one side, the victim, on the other side, the victimizer. And from the ego's point of view, this is like a pig in mud. It couldn't wish for anything better. This is its whole strategy. And if you look at the experts of the world, they're generally involved in productivity, and rightly so. I mean, that's what the world's about, And there's a perversion of that productivity where, we use chemicals that poison us and give us cancer in our food. And there's a healthy application of that productivity where we use, the right tools that have come with the evolution of technology to improve our productivity. But if you look at the mainstream media, it's always about how to make more money and, how to get the girl and all these ambitions, how to win the Super Bowl, how to triumph over another or yourself. And there's nothing wrong with self-improvement. It's what education is based upon. The whole premise of education is based upon it. But the great irony of spiritual psychotherapy is that its main focus is undoing. There's an idea that I'm a victim and I've been traumatized, and that's relatively true for many, many people. And then behind that is fear, condemnation, fear, anger, rage, lots of rage. That things aren't the way I, as the ego, want them to be. And I'll throw a temper tantrum. And I'll get offended and I'll attack and defend. And it's very challenging in situations like that, because if you look at like the police force and the army and the lawyer's job in the world, it's to take whatever side that it seems most advantageous, suitable, virtuous. Lack of virtue might not even come, the virtue might not even come into it, but whatever leads to either a false sense of justice or a real sense of justice, as far as we can experience it, using litigation, using armies, and using the police. But all of those professions, army, police, even terrorists and lawyers, their job is circumambulating this thought system of attack and defense. And if something goes wrong, we go to those people, or we go to a doctor and the emergency services and the ambulance and so forth. And I've always had this, in recent years, I've had this curiosity with the difference between emergence as a word and emergency. And they seem to be worlds apart to me. In fact, the original meaning, I feel, of the word emergence is lost in the word emergency, because what is emergent? Like, education means to pull out, in Latin it means to pull out what's inside you. And what's emergent is this hidden spiritual nature. You know, the story of Jesus or any great spiritual character in any myth is he goes from being a baby to a child to a man to spiritual maturity that transcends these identities. And one of the things that I've noticed, which is a really hard lesson I feel to learn, it's a very difficult lesson, is that the failures I've witnessed in my life, and I'm going to point out some specific examples, but those failures haven't necessarily been failures. They've been failures from the worldly point of view. And I'll explain what I mean by this. But I failed to get into Oxford. I failed to get on the course with Richard Dawkins. I went to interview. I was down to the last list. And I studied with his student. And I was sort of in awe of him. But if you walk away from what evolutionary biology is about, it's basically about, I mean, his book, The Extended Phenotype, is all about this, but it's about how the natural world adapts by natural selection to changes in the environment, and the adaptations, the mutations at the level of the genetics that are most successful. You know, like you see YouTubers, and the ones that are obsessed with like getting a large following and making lots of money, they're really, you know, they'll put like 7 or 8 different thumbnails up as the shot that's going to be the one watched, and the environment will select the one that's most successful, right? And so evolution is at work everywhere we go. You know, if you're the boss of a company, you're going to hire the salesperson that proves the best track record, right? Because that's your profit margin. And I'm not saying any of this to fault any of it. It's just the way it is. But the traits that are successful in the marketplace or in the ecosystem prove successful because the other mutations, the other options fall away and don't succeed. And I failed to get into that university with this illustrious professor, and yet something was off, right? He's a very charismatic man. He's very good at persuading his case. And if I was to have a debate with him, it would be an interesting debate, because most of the things that he says I wouldn't have any argument with, right? And he's a profoundly successful advocate for atheism. And a lot of his arguments are actually very wise and very supportive of morality, because a lot of immoral things are done in the name of religion and have been throughout history, but that's most likely because of power. You have people in the banking system that have power over others, they abuse that. You have people in politics that abuse that, and there are people in education and in religion that they abuse their authority too at times. So I think a lot of his arguments are strong and intelligent because they circle around this theme of abuse of authority, and we see it a lot. But one of the things that I've learned from the way life works, when I first went to see my mentor, he asked me 3 questions. And they were all the same question, and they all happened on 3 different occasions. So the first occasion, I met him and I said, how are you, Mr. Singh? I'm grateful for you finding time for me. And I was in the prime of my life at that time. I was 26, and I couldn't see a path outside of him being my teacher. I had no alternatives. And the question he asked me was, do you ask for your fingernails to grow? And I said no. And he said thank you, and the meeting ended. And then on another day we had the same meeting and the same question and the same answer, and the thank you, and end of the meeting. And the third time, same question, same answer. And in this story, there's a lot of wisdom. And by that I mean, there isn't much to the story. It's just a meeting between an old man and a young man, and a fairly obvious question, not a complicated question at all. But the fact that he asked it 3 times, there was something that magnetized me to the man. And by far, in my life, that relationship, relatively speaking, and only relatively speaking, not absolutely speaking, because every relationship is important, but it was the most important relationship because it was a relationship. And they say this in India, you say your mother is very important. Of course your mother and your father are very important, and your siblings and your wives and husbands and your brothers and sisters and your children, all these people are very important. But in the Indian culture, the most important relationship, relatively speaking, is the one that hits you on the head in a way that isn't aggressive, but opens a door that you've closed, and you don't even know you've closed it inside you. And so, third time, same meeting, same question, same answer. And then he says, you don't ask for your fingernails to grow, you don't ask for your heart to beat, but they do. There's a whole other set of forces in life, and those forces require the development of the capacity to listen. And that capacity to listen has been switched off, and you're not even aware of it. And it was moments like that hit me like a ton of bricks, because he said, and there's no argument with this, because the gurus out there, they'll give you methods and techniques, and they'll sell you a program, cram you with more information, more approaches. But wisdom is really about undoing. And so I failed in mainstream education at the behest of my early hero, Richard Dawkins. Like, I was not given a place, and I didn't want second best, but that's why I floundered. I didn't know what to do with my life. And then I met Tara Singh, and I realized, because he said, he had one of the early great governors of Punjab, before the British left. His name was Naniji, one who knows. And someone once asked him, as he was on his deathbed, what is it you see in this man, Tara Singh? He said, he won't settle for second best. It will make him or break him. And I think I can relate to that. I've always related to that statement, because if you're really interested in developing an ear to these other forces that lead you home to yourself beyond the domain of the ego thought system, which is extremely hard. I mean, it's simple, like the principles involved are simple, but the resistance can be huge. And from the point of view of someone who's mastered that journey, the resistance is just small. But from the point of view of the masses of humanity, it's just, it's a very long, challenging, heroic, often hellish journey. I mean, it's funny, because we associate meditation and spas and yoga classes and yoga teachers saying everything's going to be okay, and with spirituality. And I honestly find that, from my own experience, a bit of a mockery. I think this world that the ego has created, although you see these beautiful flowers, you see the resplendence of nature, the transcendence of the human condition is a hellish journey. It's a really difficult journey. And if someone tells you otherwise, I think they want to lure you into selling something to you, some wares that won't be fitting of the man or woman in you that is hidden and up to the challenge. And so that's why it demands so much forbearance. And I'm going to come back to this theme of Carita, cállate por favor. Come back to this theme of failure and how, Ramana Maharshi, he says, failure is much more, valuable than success. Failure is a place where you go to commiserate your losses, and in that place you're confronted with this need to surrender to something that is bigger than your self-concept, to say, well, I'm really at a loss here. And then you're humble, and you start to confront. Sorry, there's a dog here, and there's some people walking in the mango groves, the mango tree groves nearby, and they've got a doggy, so Charita's really excited. So yeah, failure is a difficult thing for the ego, but from the point of view of the spirit and the psychotherapy that the spirit wants to dish out, to get beyond the attachment to the pain mechanism in your mind, failure can be a great blessing. Because I could have gone down that path and become an evolutionary biologist, but there was something in my mind that didn't fall for, in that sense I can relate to Socrates, because Socrates was this intelligence that was off the scale when it comes to questioning the nature of reality. But most people probably are too busy for that kind of depth. And that doesn't make them bad, doesn't make you better. In fact, that kind of depth is really a hellish gift. It's a curse of a gift in general, because you've said somewhere in yourself that I'm up for this hero's journey. I'm up for facing boredom. I'm up for facing my desires, honoring my preferences, not condemning my desires, but working through the process of like that Rolling Stones song, you can try sometimes, but you can't always get what you want. But you might get what you need when you don't get what you want, and you might not get what you need when you don't get what you want. So, you can't say carte blanche that all desires are bad. And Ramana would chastise you for doing that, because they're just where you're at, right? So you have these desires, and there's nothing wrong with having desires. The only challenge that comes with desires is, are you a prisoner of those desires, and is there a thought system aligned with the ego behind you being bound to them? And that's a deep question, and Socrates really was on top of that. But that kind of thinking is very threatening to the ego, because like the highest aspiration that the ego can have is maybe there's something more than this. And the mystery of that is entertaining, but go any further and it's game over for the ego. And the thought system of the ego in every single way is totally opposite to the thought system of spiritual perception. And spiritual perception is only one step on the way, because once you master that, you're into the realm of knowledge, and there's no coming back from that, and you wouldn't want to. Well, there's no you to come back from it, but the center that we hold on to, where we attach all our sorrows to, has no place in that domain, and it drops away. And so it's very challenging in our society, where we're run by the authorities of education, politics, religion, and science, and commerce. We're run by those, which are just the manifestation of our appetites and our fears. It's very challenging in the context of that environment to wake up from the illusion. And I think any spiritual teacher that gives you these platitudes, or sits on a podium and tries to persuade you of how he knows the way and he's going to show you, run away from that person at all costs, because he's just selling his insecurity to you, and you're buying it because you don't know that you're just selling your own in return, right? You may be buying a product from him or whatever, or buying his teachings. And I think one of the sure signs that you've got someone that's really got your own interests at heart is a comment that Ken Wapnick made when he was asked, why should I study the Course? And he said, well, I don't think you should. I would run away from it as fast as you can. Because it's got lots of nice words in it that point to something profoundly beautiful and profoundly challenging. But for you to bring those words to realization in your own life, from the ego's point of view, that's a living hell. From the spirit's point of view, it's you waking up to understand something that essentially defies everything the world wants to make you believe. And another failure I had in my life was last year. I was 48, and I enrolled to do a degree in psychotherapy. Now, this was after studying the Course in Miracles for 30 years almost, and the Yoga Sutras for 10 years in India, and Ramana Maharshi for many years also. And one of the things that I learned from my experiences, and I'm talking in a way that is general, but it applies to spiritual communities, it applies to psychotherapists, and it applies to healers in general, is that what you find in that culture or those cultures is a lot of wounded healers. And that's an archetype. And I'm not condemning them. I'm just saying that if you've had trauma in your life, as all of us have, and you have this aspiration to put on the mask of a healer, a lot of the time, even though the willingness is coming from a good place to take such a path, a lot of the time, people betrothed to such livelihoods are, for two different reasons, married and attached to a devotion to the victimiser mentality. And the first reason is because if you get better, I don't make money from you. And the only role of a wise person is to liberate you of dependence on them and the experiences that they impart through words and feelings and gestures and silence to help you get beyond the hurdles that they have themselves got beyond. So a real therapist wants to see the back of you for good reasons, for both of you, as quickly as possible. And the second reason is a darker reason, but just because you've got a credential, and just because you've got the backing of an insurance company, and just because you've got some letters after your name, and just because you're a professor in the university teaching all these statistics and approaches and methods, doesn't mean those things haven't built your ego, made you arrogant, and bound you to the very thing that your deeper impulse is trying to transcend, trying to grow out of. So what you find with a lot of psychotherapists is that they are invested in professional victimhood, and they can speak very well, but this is where the curriculum of the Course in Miracles is so, I mean, there isn't a single school of psychotherapy, whether it's Gestalt, and these are all good things, or Carl Rogers or Carl Jung, but none of those schools of psychotherapy, not one of them, have the depth of metaphysics that the Course in Miracles has. They don't come close, right? But though Helen Schuckman and Dr. Bill Thetford, Dr. Schuckman and Dr. Thetford were doctors of psychotherapy, they wrote what was essentially a religious text, but from the point of view of psychotherapy, sane and saint have the same root. That religious text from the perspective of psychotherapy is a masterpiece, but it's got religious language in it. And from the academic perspective, unless you're doing a PhD in theology, which anyway you would have to talk about in the sort of third person, and then this saint did this, or this philosophy lies behind the Christian faith or the Hindu faith, you'd be talking in such a manner. You wouldn't be talking in a manner that advocates that this is the way to remove the blocks to the truth. That would be heathenism in academia, because even though the academic world is devoted to the truth of what's going on, you can't declare it. And you know, he who says he knows doesn't know. He who knows doesn't say. So be very wary of those that say they know the truth, because the only person that can justify the discovery of truth ultimately is you. You can stumble upon that, but you have, in my understanding, to go through a period of training the mind. So I went on this psychotherapy course, and the very short version of it was, we were asked what makes a safe environment, and I said the ending of attack thoughts, because that's what it says in the Course in Miracles, not because I'm a parrot, but because it makes bloody sane sense. You know, you can't argue with it. Take away the threats, and safety is. Now, threats are based on attack thoughts, right? And then if there's an attack thought, then naturally there's going to be a defense. Just look at the relationship between plants and insects. 90 million years, no insects, just plants on the planet. The moment they arrive, plants had to change their phenotypes, they had to adapt, they had to evolve, and they had to find ways to stop the insects eating them, because they were being attacked by the insects. So there came defense. And this is the essential teaching of the Course in Miracles, that a thought arose, a tiny small thought, that said, I can usurp God, I can become something valuable. I'm not right now. I think that's the hardest thing in the Course in Miracles to stomach, because it's something you can't like prove with an academic experiment. It's really the essence of the Course in Miracles, and it's the essence of Ramana Maharshi, and really it's the essence of questioning suffering. Like, so there's something that suffers, there's something that's attacked, and there's something that, in that feeling of being attacked by the other thing, defends, right? So there's an attacking party and there's a defending party. There's a victimiser and there's a victim. And then you look how clever the vegetarians get, and I'm not condemning vegetarians, I was a vegetarian for a long time, but they say, well, I'll just eat a plant. Well, you're attacking a plant. Oh, but they don't have a central nervous system the way mammals do. And the ego gets very clever, and I'm not, I can definitely see how having a vegetarian diet could be really supportive of your comfort zone in a journey to spiritual meaning. But I'm just saying, like, in this world, you know, you cannot not kill things. Like, you kill millions of insects throughout your life, right? You don't even know it. Just being in a body. I mean, there's a sect of religion called Jains in India, and they're very strict vegans, usually. Sometimes I think some of them eat milk, but they wear like these cloths over their mouths, so they won't accidentally swallow an insect. They're obsessed with like being pure of heart. But obsessed is the critical word there. I mean, I'm not judging them. If that's their approach, then fine. But this idea that the tiny mad idea that I can attack and kill God, right? That I can attack life. I don't really like the word God because it's so abused and misunderstood. And really, and then you have the mythological aspect of a god, which is just the potentiality of the psyche, right? So Zeus has certain potentials, and Apollo has other potentials, and Ares has other potentials, and Vishnu has potentials, and Brahman has potentials, and all these creator gods and destroyer gods and maintenance gods, Shiva, they're all potentials of the psyche. And when we worship them, we are worshipping an aspect of our nature. Just as when we worship a Hitler or some other victimizer that chooses a scapegoat, we're worshipping an aspect of our ego. In the sense that we're saying yes to that, when we're supporting that kind of behavior. So I was on this course in psychotherapy, and I was cognizant, having gone very deep into things, of the dangers of this attack defense paradigm. Because one of the lessons is sort of near 200, I think it's one. Yeah, I can't remember the number now. I'm not very good with the numbers of the lessons, but I've studied the course a lot, and I'm sure over time I'll get better at the numbers. I actually feel that technical mastery of the Course in Miracles is less important than living it. Like, you can know all the lessons and be a brilliant reference over them, but that's, I feel like there's something about this teaching that's the Course in Miracles, and for me it's been married with the study of Krishnamurti, Carl Jung, Ramana, the Yoga Sutras, Sufism, lots of traditions. It's been Gnostic Christianity, Julian of Norwich, Meister Eckhart, Cabeza de Vaca, the writing of George MacDonald, so many things I've drawn from. Even my love of nature, just observing nature, observing how animals love their children. They will protect their children. They will extend charity to their children. They will raise their children with nurturing love. I mean, that very essence of the heart of nature, which is good. There's a feeling that that's the overarching plan here. But I do feel with the Course in Miracles, it's really important to live it, not to pontificate about it or to quote every lesson perfectly. But in one of the lessons, it says the right response to attack is to be free of defenses and not to attack back. And that's insane. I mean, from the ego's point of view, it's insane, right? It's like Gandhi. If you've seen the movie Gandhi, like Einstein, one of the greatest minds in the world at the time, and he says, like, countless generations hence, scarcely will they believe that such a man as Gandhi lived. And we've been, put Gandhi on a pedestal and all kinds of things, but it took some guts to, I mean, he was a lawyer and he had a certain position in society and he had a charisma, and, other people have tried his methods and been totally walked all over and killed. But he got lucky. So there's no guarantee that in this world that when you apply defenselessness, it will help you in this world. But who knows what the effects of our actions are on a higher level. And there was an artist in 1976, I think she was in New York, she was in an art gallery, and or maybe she was in England, I don't know, but she was in 1976, in this gallery, and she had a table laid out in the gallery, and her performance art was like, I'm going to stand here all day and you can do anything to me and I won't react. And on the table there were like pleasurable objects like a feather and massage oil and paint, body paint, and then there were things like scissors and a knife and a gun. And to begin with, the people came in, they just walked around her, and then people started to get a bit bolder and they would use the feather to brush her, and then they'd, brush her hair or cut her hair or then pierce her skin with the knife. And finally a man came and put a gun at her head, and then another man came and took the gun away. And I think the sort of lesson of that is that the thought system of man tends to be like a child trapped in this curiosity between pleasure and exaltation and destruction and misery. And I think it was, the function of an artist is to expose things, to make us think. That's the function of an artist. That's the role of the artist. And to take that quote again by Ken, is why would you study the Course in Miracles? What would you say if I said I'm interested? And he said, run away as fast as you can. And I always admired that he said that. But then there's a similar quote by Joseph Campbell, and he says, why study mythology? And he says, well, I don't think you should ever do anything because another person tells you to do it. It should come from another inner voice, an inner compulsion, an inner draw. And if you have that, you might find that the study of mythological meaning can give your life a lot of depth and beauty, or reveal that depth and beauty, and also reveal secrets to how you are your own worst enemy. And at the heart of that pain mechanism that leads to people picking up a gun, putting it to someone's head in an artist's performance, at the heart of that pain mechanism is delusional thinking. And delusional thinking is the thought system of the ego. I'm on the course and I say, the course in psychotherapy at Edge Hill University, and I say, well, safety is about the ending of attack thought. That's how safety comes about. And I was speaking at a level of clarity, but then there was an ex-police officer and a woman on the course, and she said, oh, well, how can safety have anything to do with attack thoughts? And I said, well, because the absence of them guarantees it. Now, from the perspective of the Course in Miracles, that's a vertical statement. There's a statement that is true. But from the body's perspective, which is a wholly neutral thing, it has two voices to listen to. The voice system of the ego, which is the victimiser narrative, the defense, the attack mechanism, playing field. And the voice, which is vertical, which says the voice of spirit, the voice of a deeper psychotherapy, a voice of wisdom. And then there was another woman on the course who, when I described my challenges with my ex-wife and her ex-girlfriend or ex-wife, and my process of looking at my projections onto them, my feeling of being victimized by their decisions, which was true. I mean, I'm not going to lie about it. I felt very hurt. But then, I have enough faith in life, a muscle of faith in life that's developed over the years, despite immense psychological challenges born of people stealing cars, stealing money, girlfriends cheating on me, me feeling let down by my yoga teacher in India, painful divorces, challenges with my father, challenges with my mother. All these external stories. I have enough faith in life built on the muscle of experience, and especially the study of the Course in Miracles and Ramana, and to a lesser extent the study of the Yoga Sutras, and Krishnamurti for sure. That from experience I've seen that when you're embroiled in the battleground of the ego thought system, wisdom pulls you away to 1,000 feet above the battleground. So the worst thing you can do at a certain level is engage with the attack thoughts. Now, often, and I mean often, we don't have any choice. Because people pick on people who are not in their right minds, victimizers that are not in their right minds. Remember I said that's the critical thing. Like when you're asleep, like you will laugh and undermine other people. You will take sides on the gender debate. You will take sides in the wars. You will cheat and lie and do whatever it takes to sacrifice your integrity to get the best outcome for yourself, or the concept that you have of yourself at that time. However, if you're interested in truth, there's something that happens where you get bored of it. I've always felt that, like, let's say you're drawn to watching movies or videos or playing computer games or smoking or drinking. I have this faith, like these things that people define as distractions, and they're, like sometimes it's just really good to switch off, because the mind's always working, and to process spiritual progress can be challenging, and you need to give yourself space. But I do have this faith that just as very painful experiences come along and you avoid as best you can being embroiled in the attack defense story. I mean, when people violate your rights, like this other woman that I mentioned that took offense to me, I said something, like I said, I've had some experiences that made me realize that my relationship with my mother's animus, the masculine side of my mother, that's aggressive and unhealed, I've gone beyond them. And by the way you're acting, I'm not sure if you've looked at that in yourself, and it could be your father's anima, or it could be your mother's animus. And I was accused of gaslighting her by the policewoman for that. I wasn't. I said, that's how I'm witnessing what's talking in you. neither of those women at that time knew what an animus or an animal was. Didn't make me better than them. But out of this process of my deep introspection and passion for psychotherapy and psychology, and hands down, the greatest psychologists in all of time, in my opinion, are Jesus in the Course in Miracles and Ramana Maharshi. I mean, they are way ahead of anyone else. I'm not putting them on a pedestal, because you'll get there one day, right? That's inevitable. But when you study the intelligence of what they're saying and the enormous compassion for victimizers, people will only victimize other people if they're not in their right mind, if they believe in scarcity, if they believe that attacking others and defending and undermining is going to get them somewhere valuable, if they believe in shaming and aggression. Now, there's one caveat about shame and aggression, because sometimes those things can be positive, right? If you come in and you have like a father saying, look, you've been abusive to your mother, that's not okay, right? And I'll smack you. I'm not advocating smacking, but some forces sometimes, make us humble. And like when we shame people, we can do that in a way that is purely sadistic. And in other ways, it can be like, well, what you did is shameful. Like, have you thought about that? Have you thought about how you persecuted an innocent person? I mean, if you take someone like Putin, he's built this network around him which is based on fear. And any kind of like toxic Machiavellian character is going to be like that. They're going to use fear to justify the sense of birds of a feather flock together. Look, I'll help you if you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back, and together we are going to fight the injustice here. And then often people that do that become perpetrators of more injustice and more, because they think they're better than others secretly. And I suppose, in the eyes of the world, I was accused of being someone that gaslit. I was accused of being homophobic and racist. I was accused of being misogynistic. I don't identify with any of those statements. And one of the things that this, because it was on a psychotherapy degree, and so to go into a realm that you've devoted your mind to for a long time, as well as being interested in physics and biology, but to be, it was a moment for me where I was like, wow, I'm like what happened to Christ and Socrates is they get crucified for speaking the truth, right? They're not saying I want to attack you. They're not saying I want to undermine you. They're just saying, well, I think you're missing something that you don't know is being overlooked here. And then what the ego says, well, how dare you put me in a box like that, right? And it gets very threatened, because the ego, its plan, the salvation plan of the ego is to keep you miserable and trapped in the illusions of your mind. And so if someone comes along and they've done a lot of self-work and they're saying, well, I don't personally devote myself to that thought system anymore. And there isn't the listening. There isn't this listening to say, well, okay, where there's a lot of quietude within, there can be a movement out of the thought system that fear reigns over. And maybe that's what's talking in me. And one of the things that really was the sort of silver lining of that experience in the psychotherapy degree, it was like, well, you know, maybe you were taken out of context, maybe you were misunderstood. There's no way you can argue otherwise. I mean, people will try, but even though that's the case, your job here is not to fix the world. The world can't be fixed. The world's inherently flawed. It's based on it's not based in the facts of what's actually going on. But your dedication to the facts, that analogy of shadow puppets in Indonesian culture is really helpful, because when you go and see an Indonesian shadow puppet show, you're looking at the shadows on a cloth. And the shadows appear to be real. They appear to be moving. They appear to be what's real, what's the fact. But the fact is the shadows are ephemeral. They don't have any basis in reality. There's a wooden puppet behind the screen with a light being shone on it from behind. And that is the facts in that situation. But we fall for this mirage, for this magic illusion trick. And that's why the teaching of forgiveness in the Course in Miracles, not the teaching of forgiveness in Christianity, which is a whole different, it's the ego thought system in general, the forgiveness of the Christian philosophy. But in the Course in Miracles, forgiveness says, forgiveness is necessary in this world because it liberates you of buying into the victimiser paradigm. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't take the university to court for supporting what was ostensibly abuse against me. You know, just because people shout a gaslighter, misogynist, homophobe, all these things which have no basis in truth, doesn't mean they should get away with that. So I you know, it makes sense to, you know, seek compensation. I don't wish to pay for that course. I don't think it's fair. I was derailed and so forth. But at a deeper level, that's just practical things that I'm doing. The failure of that experience was, what was the gift of it? Well, it was like, you're going to continue to see these stories in the world. But this journey that every spiritual hero makes, whether it's Jesus or Ramana, from child, babe to child, to man, to spiritual man, requires you putting on the goggles of spiritual vision. And so in the Course in Miracles, it says this world was over a long time ago. It's an echo, a memory, an echo of a memory in your mind, essentially. And your job, like the Buddha, is to wake up. Buddha means one who woke up from this dream. And to realize that you're dreaming it. A part of your mind is dreaming it. And the part of the mind that's dreaming it is delusional. And there's a way of infecting that dreamer with a strategy to wake up from the dream. And for a long time, the dream is a nightmare, and then it shifts to a happy dream. And you get to a point where you're no longer participating or giving credence to the attack or defense mechanisms of the world. And without a shadow of doubt, you know, this is hugely traumatic to the ego thought system. And I don't think there's a single person that goes through this transitional phase of the journey on the sort of the river of Styx, the journey through death, the valley of death, if you like, without immense turmoil and immense stress. And you meet these Course in Miracles students or these yoga teachers or whatever, and they're full of these spiritual platitudes, and they're like, I see the soul within you, and I honor your peace. And I think the Muslim word jihad, which is grossly misunderstood by most Muslims, in my understanding, jihad means to fight a holy war. And it's got nothing to do with the world outside. It's got nothing to do with the people that you have challenges with in the world, or that have challenges with you. Jihad, it means to commit an act of genocide towards the thoughts that would attack and defend the self-concept that is inherently trying to blind you from who you really are. And that means how you see others, right? So if you steal my computer or my phone, or take money from me, or cut off my leg, the response of the ego is, in me, would be to defend myself and that's a self that's identified with the body. And I the Course in Miracles came into my life when I was 19. And it's a year-long, it's like a text, a manual for teachers at the end, a workbook with a lesson for every day of the year in the middle, and then a pamphlet on psychotherapy and prayer. But there's the idea that it's like 1 year's practice, to get this teaching. And, within the first 2 or 3 lessons, you're confronted with that jihad. I mean, the declaration of that jihad, that I'm going to destroy your self-concept by the application of these lessons. I mean, they say, nothing I see means anything. I see a world of vengeance because meaningless thoughts that the decision maker in my mind have selected has been prescribed to the things I see out there. Because I believe myself to be a self-concept which has no relationship with the truth. And I think, when you read those first 3 to 5 lessons, that my way of seeing is a form of vengeance, you could go lifetimes without fathoming the meaning of that, fathoming the depth of that. You could be a professor of psychotherapy, and just spend your whole life caught in, advocating arguments for feminism, or much rarer in this world, for masculinism, and taking all of these masks, whether you're a billionaire or you're a street urchin, putting on these masks to support the thought system of the victim and the victimizer in your mind. And you could even teach the Course in Miracles and not bring it to application, sound very charismatic. And I think one of the things I really treasure about Ramana Maharshi is that, if you look into what he's saying using Sanskrit and Tamil language, like you can't, like Holy Spirit and God and viveka and ego, like I don't think there's I've studied Sanskrit. I don't think there's a language in the world, except perhaps Tamil, that comes close to, like, you go to the Arctic and there's a million words for ice, among the Inuit, because there's so many different types of ice. The whole culture and society depends on the quality of the ice, because they're living on it and around it. And this spiritual culture that is the backbone of the best of Indian culture, they have so many, beautiful insights into the levels of mind, and, words that just don't exist in English. So you can't translate these two things, but they're like, like Holy Spirit in English would have to involve discrimination, detachment, like a whole series of Sanskrit words to get the same meaning that we get in the word Holy Spirit, and vice versa. Like viveka means discrimination in Sanskrit to English, right? But the nuances of how the elephant at the City of the Blind is described in words, it differs. Like, we're basically, until we've gotten to the state of being enlightened in our perception, our descriptions, the descriptions of those who are enlightened that are talking to us, aren't fully transferred. There isn't a full transmission yet. So in some ways it seems confusing to bring in Ramana and the Course in Miracles. But the thing that I love about Ramana is, we don't have video footage of Jesus. We don't even know if we existed. We have a lot of strong documents. People that are devoted to his message will argue that what I just said is wrong. We know the fossils of the dinosaurs. In a way, it's easier to prove they existed than it is to tell you that Jesus existed. But what we find in Ramana is, here's a man that doesn't want to be a teacher. He doesn't describe himself as a teacher. He doesn't want to start a religion. And he's not interested in starting an ashram, but it happens around him anyway. And miracles happen around him anyway. And a lot of people find great peace around his teachings. And relative to the kind of rabbis around him, shall we say, in inverted commas, he cuts through all the crap. He says, well, you can go with all your complicated spiritual books, your theories about reality, but to me the only thing that matters is what happens when, with your total heart, you ask the question, who am I? But we don't have a Ramana in our lives physically in the body right now. There's no one you can go to like that. And those that set themselves up to be such a person say that they're part of his official lineage and all of that. Well, he didn't have one. But I do feel the Course in Miracles is in a sense the closest thing in book form to someone taking you by your hand through this incredibly difficult labyrinth, saying, well, you don't know what you're capable of right now. And where we're going almost defies the imagination, because what I'm promising you is a way to see this world in such a way that you will only have gratitude for everything. How can you have gratitude for like plagues and murderers and wars and rapists and people that use weaponized victimhood narratives to attack others? Like, how can you have gratitude for that? Well, you have to start to see that they're crying out for help. And how you see them healed is the secret to your own healing. And you know, when we evoke images around the word fearless, we might see a Rocky-like figure from the movies, or a Marine with his pep talk about, you know, stay hard, get all testosteroned up. You can't judge any of that. But I think fearlessness is very closely related to desirelessness. But not the end of preference. And the shell of the personality remains there, but there's only love for all. There's compassion for the victim, and there's compassion for the victimiser. And there's no condemnation, although there's condemnation of the behavior that attacks. But not in the sense of making you less than or judging, but just like a very loving mother that says, well, you know, don't hit your sister. Don't hit your brother. They're worthy of love. And they may be annoying you right now, but that's not okay. You're bigger than that. Your heart is infinitely bigger than that. And one of the things, because I've been thinking about, you know, because I'm creating these videos and I'm watching how many people watch them, and I'm learning about the mask of this role. And they all sound quite serious, you know, because life suffering is a serious matter at a certain level. But then the Course says a line that's very similar to Oscar Wilde's line. It says, religion is remembering to laugh. And Oscar Wilde says that life is far too important to take seriously. And I think that's seriousness, right? If someone puts a bullet in you, or someone takes pleasure in sadistically undermining you and likes to laugh at you and hurt you, They're not in their right mind. And it's funny because like Jordan Peterson has become this big guru in our time, right? And I could see the influence of his quite harsh father recently, because he made this Twitter post where he said he wrote to the Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel. He said, "Give him hell," right? And I just thought, oh God, that man's got a long way to go. Meaning take out the Palestinians, just totally destroy them. And here's a man that's advocating, he's a clinical psychologist, and I think he's done a lot of good in the world. I think he speaks to the seriousness. So how can you laugh about those kind of things? Well, there's three qualities in the manual for teachers. There's trust, gentleness, and patience. And I think if you have this sense that in me, though I can't relate to that right now, there's this infinite patience. And when I marry that with trust and gentleness, I start to have some connection with who I am. And it's patience for an outcome which is able to treasure the beauty in those that are most caught in hate, depression, retaliation, pious forgiveness. That's how I see the Christian definition of forgiveness, because it's like, I'm very holy and I will forgive you because that's how God would want me to behave, right? Whereas in the Course in Miracles, forgiveness is like, no, this is a correction for your delusional sight, and it's a way of cutting time in the illusion so that you can transcend this idea that you have no control as the decision maker in your mind over the projections of fear. That's what forgiveness is really. It's like, no, you have a huge amount of control. You have total control. You're the only one that has control. There's no teacher or person outside you that can change your mind. There's the illusion they can, a harsh general in an army pushing his officers. Yeah, they'll follow his orders. But the abuse of authority, there's always those rare individuals in this world that say, I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to take sides. I'm not going to join a war to support a cause which has no love in it. And of course, there are some things which appear bigger than all of that, like the Second World War, or, if you don't do what Putin says regarding the reporting of the war in Russia, you'll go to the concentration camps. Yeah, the world, the ego is immensely cruel. It's incredibly defiant to run away as fast as it can from God. And when I say run away as fast as you can from someone that's trying to sell you God, that's probably running towards God, because where there's vested interests, there's often a toxic outcome. So that's why, whichever way I've turned in life, I've always come back to this statements by Krishnamurti that truth is a pathless land, and by Emerson that whoever so would be a man would be a nonconformist, because you've got to learn to listen to spirit inside you. And in medieval times, the only man that could laugh at the king was the jester. And that's the most valuable person you're going to ever have in your life, because if everyone's taking you so seriously and you are yourself, it's only that part of you that can say, oh my God, dude, you're really doing this to yourself and others, or the illusion of others. You're really subscribing to the belief that persecution, attack, and defense can liberate. Now, in the case of the university, like, they charged me a big fee and made me out as a monster. That, it was this classical ego strategy where you'll shame someone. And I'm like, well, like a good mother or father, I'm like, well, that's shameful behavior. Why are you doing that? That's you're advocating psychotherapy, and your actions are betraying a totally different thing. You're supporting psychosis and psychopathic behavior in the name of psychotherapy. So you don't just stand back and let that happen. But at the same time, for me, the journey, which I'm not, but at the same time, the journey for me has been, okay, you really want to take this course seriously? You really want to learn to laugh at yourself and others in a gentle way that doesn't attack them, then, or yourself, then what you're going to have to do is really get with the program of the Course in Miracles. You've been at it for 30 years, but then they're saying, and this is immensely difficult for the ego, even the spiritual ego, right? What they're saying there in the Course is, the illusion of attack thoughts is what your mind gives power to, that justifies the lifespan of the ego and extends it. And the extension of a thought system in you, the subscription to that thought system that transcends right and wrong, that is the action of rightness. That is the action that, as Abraham Lincoln said, safety, rightness is imbued with the instruments of safety, or delivered with the instruments of safety by the heavens. I mean, Lincoln was in this incredible war, and he loved America, which means he loved the North and the South, but he took a stand. He said, look, I'm not going to support the slavery economy. That's primitive. We can do better than that. The persecuted should not be less than. They should be liberated from their persecution. That's humanistic. And that's what this country is about. And he stood for that. And that's where greatness comes in, But man, was he, you see the pictures of him during the war, the Civil War, and the suffering he went through to handle that hell. But he said, that was his conviction. Rightness is provided with the instruments of safety by the heavens. And Gandhi's conviction was, if someone's going to be hurt, it's going to be me. I'm not going to harm another. That's ahimsa in Sanskrit. And I've thought a lot about that because I just eat beef right now, and it's healing my skin. And obviously, there's the vegans who'll come out and say, well, you're a monster because you eat beef. And I'm like, well, if you study Alan Savory's approach to ecology, you see that, when you don't manage the herbivores in the right way as the top predator, and we are the top predator, we can easily take out the wolf and the lion and the big snakes and the elephants. We're the top predator. And okay, elephants don't tend to eat animals, they eat plants, but they don't want to have a fight. No one really wants to have a fight with an elephant. But if you want to manage that ecosystem, then the right management of the herbivores is critical, because if you have the wrong management, they eat all the young shrubs and the seedlings, and you have a desert. And if you manage them well, they poop in the right way, and they fertilize, and you work with nature. So yeah, I eat beef, right? But in terms of ahimsa, I believe that there is this rightness about how we manage our ecology, and I'm fine with vegetarians and vegans. I think that's fine. But rightness is provided with the instruments of safety by the heavens, and I will not harm another. If anyone's going to get harmed, it's going to be my body. But there's a man that's beginning to come to the awareness that he's not the body. And look at the forces that Gandhi unleashed, And that's frightening to contemplate. I mean, who's going to go there and just take a punch and then 100 punches and still have love in their heart for the fear that's attacking them? Or not for the fear, but for the thing that's behind the fear, that can't see its true identity. That's spirituality. And it's in a sense, it's anything but peaceful. But it is peaceful because it's peaceful from a state of mind which doesn't recognize separation and won't be bullied by this toddler tyrant of the immature mind, whether it's in oneself or in another. And that's what mind training is. The Course in Miracles says it's a book in mind training. And if you go to the Course or to Ramana, they say there's no effort in this. And then they say there's immense effort in this, right? You've got to be very willing to take this task on because it's really difficult. So how can there be no effort and effort? Because what you are is only blocked by an immensely sophisticated illusion that you subscribe to. So there is a sense of effort in dropping that illusion. And yes, it's the most natural thing in the world, and it's very simple, but it doesn't come without resistance, because it's like when bad bacteria set up in your stomach and you stop eating sugar, you're not feeding them anymore, and they get cranky and they're like, well, I want my fight, I want my food and my fight against your system, because that's what justifies my existence, and you're not feeding me, so I'm going to die out. And then you get very grumpy and you can get sick. It's called a healing crisis, when there's a die-off of the thing that's causing you the problem. And the same is true of the thought system. Like, it's so tempting to have these thoughts that attack and undermine others, because that makes you feel better about yourself when they've shamed and undermined you. You think, well, I've triumphed over them. That's not triumph. That's just getting trapped in the same thought system that is the original problem that repeats over and over again. I do believe that living in this world for most of human beings is immensely difficult in two ways. One, it's immensely difficult because sticking to the truth, if that's what you're devoted to, is going to be very challenging because your ego is very tempted to deny it. Or it's very difficult because there's a part of you that they say ignorance is bliss, the part that takes comfort in just living a life which doesn't question the depths of your pain and what is the pain mechanism behind it. You're going to have a long journey ahead of you of coming to awakening, and most humans aren't very happy. And I don't agree with Jordan Peterson that you have to have children to be happy, or you're going to regret it, or whatever. The goal of life is not work. It's not to fit into a pretty sick society. It's to wake up and almost everything that is based in vested interests is got no interest in you waking up, and yet the whole of nature is only interested in that. It's like the crown of evolution. Krishnamurti said, if you want to jump the 1,000,000 years, the mind has to become very, very still. That means the end of neurosis, neurotic reaction, the end of the victim mind, and the end of the condemnation not of the behaviors of the victimizer, but of the victimizer, seeing them as a sinner, because that's just a projection of your own belief about yourself pushed out. So when you heal that illusion, which is a tremendously huge fish to catch and slay, I mean, if you think that comes with these beautiful, that's why Ken Wapnick said, these beautiful platitudes in the Course in Miracles. God speaks to me throughout the day. My holiness blesses everything I see. Sounds lovely. Run from that like for your dear life. Because what it entails is looking in the mirror like Dorian Gray, like the story of Dorian Gray, Portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, where you're just looking in the mirror of this character on the one level that seems very beautiful, and my holiness blesses everything I see, God speaks to me throughout the day, and then in the attic of your mind there's this monstrosity which you just have to read a newspaper or turn on the news or look at Twitter where there's a political conversation. The hate, the victimization, the victimizing, the false victimization, the false victimhood, the games the ego plays to trick you. And yet, do you ask for your fingernails to grow? There are other forces in life. When the mind is quiet, you start to become aware of the ley lines of those hidden forces. And they're not observable by the body's eyes. And you've got to get through this whole clutter of the mind system that says, oh, that's a holy thought, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like an onion that you're peeling and peeling, and it's just you're crying, and every layer you go through, you have these moments of joy and these moments, and then moments of dark nights of the soul and great pain and platitudes by spiritual teachers, and you just want to kick them, and and then you have these professors of psychotherapy with their PhDs, and they're so trapped in this attack defense mechanism, and they're using these props of feminism or woke ideology, or in the case of like the right-wingers, they're using these props in the anti-woke brigade, anything they can to supply ammunition to fuel the arguments that support I'm better than you, morally, intellectually, emotionally. And everything that comes from such a thought system is bereft of meaning. And the only thing that's true about everyone you see is goodness and light and love. And then your job is to translate that into your knowing. And to relate that knowing, which is like a baby that's just been born, so fragile and delicate, to your perceptive focus. I think like often comedians are very interesting because on the one hand their job is to remember to laugh, and the other hand, like a lot of comedy is a sort of socially acceptable form of expressing anger. And then the Course in Miracles says, anger is never justified. And that's the gold. Mastery of that. And that's I'm going to swear almost, but it's a damned tall order. You know, you get married and your wife goes and sleeps with a bunch of other men, you know. As a woman, maybe your husband beats you, you know. You can go through horrific experiences in the dream. And then the Course in Miracles comes along like the most annoying brat you've ever met, and it says, I'm not a victim of the world I see, and I'm asking you to say this. Are you a victim of the world you see? Well, say the words, even if you don't believe them. And you're like, okay, come here, I will slap you. And that's the irony, that, you know, this book that is teaching liberation from fear is probably the most frightening thing you'll ever come across. You know, it's like there's a part of you that has this scroll, right? And on the one hand, you say what the Course in Miracles says, I'm not a victim of the world I see. My meaningless thoughts are showing me a meaningless world. What I see is a form of vengeance. And then you've got this other hand, and it's got in it a scroll, and it's all the almost endless ego arguments why these three statements are a lie. I'm a victim of what he said. I'm offended by what she said. I'm dumb.